This is the GenWhy Leaders Podcast. Welcome to the GenWhy Leaders Podcast, where we guide millennials to become the next generation of business leaders and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Eric Hughey, and multiple times a month, we bring you interviews from high-performing millennials who are challenging perceptions and changing expectations of our generation. Our mission is to help you overcome fear, take action, and go confidently in the direction of your dreams. It's time to start preparing now, mainly because 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day, which will create a vacuum of career opportunities that you've been waiting for. Will you be ready?
Hey friends, welcome to MagHub Monday. I'm your host, Nick Pataro, and this is the video series where we talk about everything related to media, advertising, sales, and of course, MagHub. Today, we have a special guest, Eric Hughey from Vessel Media and also Leverage Labs. Eric's got an interesting perspective on publishing. He's kind of sat on all sides of the media desk as a buyer, an agency world, and now and then also as a salesperson at a publishing company. And so Eric's going to be talking today about why publishers should start podcasts and how their audience, their existing audience, can help jumpstart their podcast so they can begin earning revenue on that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick this over to our recorded session. If you want to connect with Eric, LinkedIn is probably the best place. There's a link to Eric's LinkedIn on the email that you just received this video from. So like I said, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Hey everybody, welcome to MagHub Monday. I'm your host, Nick, and today we've got a special guest, Eric Hughey of Vessel Media, and Eric is going to talk to us today about why you as a publisher should start a podcast. Eric, how's it going?
Nick, it's going well, man. Thanks so much for the invite. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to have you. So just to give everybody a little bit of background about you, where you're located, what you've been up to over the last 5-10 years. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here. A little bit about me. I'm here in Kansas City. Really spent my career on all sides of the media desk. So about 10 years in my career now. Spent 3 collectively doing PR, corporate PR, media pitching, all that sort of thing. 3 years at agencies, kind of being the liaison between the media and the corporations. And then 3 years at a B2B publisher selling advertising media space. And then as of the last year or so, I've started my own business, which is Vessel Media, really aimed at helping small, mid-sized publishers grow new revenue streams, cut costs, save time, very, very much the consultative type view. And then simultaneously in the background during all that, I've had a podcast operating called GenWhy Leaders, which is all about helping millennials become the next generation of business leaders and entrepreneurs. So all those things combined, it's given me really well-rounded experience in media and marketing, and really enjoy the ride so far.
Yeah, there's a lot to do in media.
That's an understatement for sure.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of sat on all sides of the desk, right? That's what you said. Yeah. What did you learn? I mean, was there a takeaway that you because you saw all sides of the picture?
Yeah, I think ultimately what it comes back to, I think it's perhaps an overused analogy, or not even analogy, but a phrase, is that people want to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And so trust, I think, is the huge thing. And really maybe the bigger component is just relationships in general. I think media, but especially B2B media, is such a tight-knit community and small industry that it's, you might be eventually working with a competitor, or you might split ways with a current employer or a teammate, and then eventually meet back up with them. So I think it's always important to treat people well, because you never know which side of the desk you'll be on, and if you're the buyer or the seller, and what scenarios you may encounter. So you want to always leave every situation, on good terms and earn people's trust.
Yeah, burning bridges is always a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, us as salespeople, we can get fiery sometimes. So,
No doubt.
yeah, but well, that's a great experience that you bring to the table, especially for publishers who have maybe spent their whole career on one side of the coin, right? Selling campaigns, or maybe folks on the agency side who have just been that liaison the whole time, and they've never actually sat in the seat of somebody that's trying to manage a brand, or someone that's trying to manage a publication, right? So
yeah, exactly. I think there's a marketing thought leader out there. Most people are aware of him, but it's Gary Vaynerchuk. And what he talks about is all brands should operate from the mentality that they're media companies first, and that they just produce so much content that they become the thought leader for whatever industry, product, or service that they may be providing. And so I think a similar mentality has to happen from the media perspective, is that all media companies should have to operate, or should operate, as really great marketers. Because if not, brands are going to be their own companies. There's media companies. There's plenty of examples of really good companies doing that already, that are really doing well, who don't need to invest that much in PR efforts, or purchase media, and do things themselves. So yeah, I think media companies really have to up their marketing game if they haven't already, and that's where I try to provide some value in terms of podcasting, and trying to use that as a tool for inbound marketing, and having that be a top of funnel tool for them to get those leads in the door.
yeah, so that nice transition here, right, as to why should a publisher care to start a podcast? It's maybe not in their kind of repertoire right now of doing audio content, but I'm familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's a big personality, but he's got a lot of really good ideas. And with brands, if they are to take his advice, right, like you said, they kind of have to lean less on traditional media outlets in terms of getting that kind of trust built with their consumers, which media outlets have been so effective in doing over the last 50, 100, 200 years. And it's just, if brands are becoming that, right, how do media companies stay relevant? And so one of the ways is, starting a podcast or something similar. So why should publishers start a podcast?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways, or reasons why, rather. I think overall it really aids in that idea that if the average Joe is starting a podcast like myself, you're likely not going to monetize it unless you're a Joe Rogan, or someone that has a lot of clout, or really well known in an industry, that the day you start a podcast, you're going to have such a following behind you that you can monetize it. And so that's where publishers come into play, is because they have that predetermined audience, X amount of thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000, millions even, that they can go to their key relationships with and advertising, their advertising partners, and say, hey, give them the advance notice. Hey, we're going to start this podcast about XYZ. We're going to need a sponsor for, a pre-roll, mid-roll, and end-roll ad, or, whatever structure you set up, and provide value to them in that way, because it's essentially another digital product and way for them to get in front of your audience and connect buyers and sellers. And so I think that's really the main reason why. It's an underutilized way to create new revenue, and a lot of people aren't taking care of it, or taking advantage of it, rather, simply because I think it's one more task to take on. It is a time-intensive process, but I think for the low barrier of entry that it has, as far as just getting a mic and doing something like we're doing now, there's tons of platforms to record on: GoToMeeting, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. The cost and the barrier for entry are very, very low to do it. It's strictly the time investment. So if you can, empty someone's plate on your team to take care of it and to start a podcast, I think the dividends it pays for the time invested is huge, because you get the end effect of, okay, well, now we have a new revenue stream coming, but we also have a new stream of content, right? So that one podcast of, whether it's 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it may be, yeah, it starts as one podcast, but if you dissect that out and you have, 3 new article ideas for your editorial calendar, or you just take 3, snippets of that and make Q&A with a, industry thought leader and post those at different times of a month or a course of a year, snip it up and make different, video or audio segments and place those on social media, and you drive engagement to your website from those channels. I can go on and on about why, but I think that's the main reason, is that one, it's an underutilized revenue stream, but then two, it also becomes a kind of this ripple effect of more content for you to use, and that's how you beat out the competition, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And with certain media channels, waxing and waning, right? With print traditionally on the slow decline, right? Into the future, right? We were talking about this before we hit record, right? It's probably not going to go away for a very long time, if ever. It's just not what it used to be. And so opening up those channels for additional ways to connect the buyers and the sellers is really important, so you can stay relevant with your audience.
For sure.
And so the time component, I can attest to, doing these MagHub Monday videos. It does take a little bit of time to, having the conversation is the easy part, right? That's the fun part. You get to record and chat with somebody that maybe you haven't in a long time or ever. And so that's the fun part. It's getting it all edited up and put out there. But that can be done by an intern, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What you really need is, I found that successful podcasts have a domain expert that hosts the podcast, right? They have someone who's knows the industry inside and out, probably an editor, right? Or someone that's comfortable doing a podcast type role, but knows the industry, and they can ask all the questions. They have all the context, so that when an expert listener tunes into that podcast, they know it's not fluff, right? This person knows their stuff and they're bought in early on. Whereas if you try to bring maybe a junior level person in to do the podcast, sure, they've got a voice for radio, but maybe they don't know the topics that are important to the listeners. So
Exactly.
Yeah, all interesting things with podcasting.
For sure. Yeah, I think having an editor in that interviewer role is really key, just because, again, they can kind of fall in that ripple effect of the content. They can then go and say, hey, well, this was a great interview. I'm now going to make this, in print, a spread, Q&A, or, again, chop it up and make it 3 shorter videos for social. And yeah, if they're the thought leader, I think that's even greater value to the podcast.
Agreed. So when someone, now that we've convinced all of the folks who are watching this that they need to start a podcast, what does it take? What does it look like for someone to, not all the gory details, but, in general, what is a framework for someone who says, yeah, maybe we should give this a go?
Yeah, I think a general framework is to come up with its own brand. There's probably an overarching brand that'll tie into whatever industry or whatever publication you're producing. But I think most podcasts do have their own individual brand, simply because it does have its own logo, its own intro, outro, and then viewers want to know what they're going to get out of an episode. So in that intro, your show has to have a certain focus that a viewer or listener is going to know what they're going to get out of it. And so I think having that kind of set in stone before you begin is really key. Just knowing what your show is going to be about to provide value to your audience. And then I think, as far as like a few general tips, I would say, record 3 to 5 episodes and don't publish them at all. And then again, go to your key relationship partners, your key advertisers that would have been with you for years, and say, hey, we've been kicking around this idea of a podcast for a while now. We went ahead and recorded 3 to 5 episodes. Here they are. Here's some links to them. If you could listen to them and just let us know if you think these are valuable, and even if you're interested in sponsoring them, that would be great. I think that's one key tip. And then 2, if you decide to commit and go through with it, I would keep a buffer of episodes. And what I mean by that is kind of that offset schedule. It's very similar to a print publishing model, to where you're always kind of backdated from where you're publishing in terms of real time. That way, if someone cancels on you or you have to reschedule an interview, you're not stressed out scrambling to interview someone last minute. You're comfortable. You have a buffer. You have a queue of episodes to pull from. And then I guess 3 would be to batch recordings. Pick a day a month or a day a week, however often you're publishing, and try to do 2x the amount of recordings as your publishing schedule, and that will fill that buffer, fill that queue.
Those are good tips. Yeah. When we kind of started this, you mentioned that this could be a driver for a podcast, could be a driver for inbound leads. Obviously, you're reaching out to those key accounts that work with you, that you have relationships with already, to potentially upsell, but also really to get that kind of beta feedback on how are we doing? Is this good? Do you like this? Do you not like that? Right? That type of feedback is really important in the early days. But you mentioned, how does this feed inbound leads? Like, how does this help you increase your ability to reach advertisers who you maybe haven't worked with before?
Yeah, for sure. From a sales standpoint, I've seen this played out in my own life. Even in my ad sales days, I would go to prospective advertisers and work with mid-level managers or directors in these companies, and say, hey, I'm Eric, I'm with Endeavor, that's who I was with previously, and we publish XYZ publications, and we'd love to talk to you about that. But also, in the meantime, I also produce this podcast all about helping millennials become next gen leaders. You seem like a mid-level manager that would be able to provide some value to our audience, and would love to have you on. And that's usually the latter portion is how the conversation starts. Then they ask questions about it, and I get them on the show and interview them, and you really start that relationship. And again, back to my first point of our conversation, is that establishes trust, and they get to know me, I get to know them. They know I'm not some slick back hair used car salesman just trying to sling ads, that I want to try to provide value to them and to my own audience that I'm responsible for as well too. And so it kind of demonstrates that trust at a high level. And then two, I think that's the sales point of view, but from the marketing point of view, in terms of inbound, it's that high level funnel, right? It's brand awareness that I don't know how often I've been in Spotify or iTunes and just clicked the link to share podcasts with friends and family, like, hey, listen to this, thought of you, here's that here's that pain point in the industry we've been thinking about, here's this person's context. So it's a very easily shareable asset in terms of a digital product for it to catch fire and spread across the web. And two, there's no additional cost of duplication. If you listen to thought leaders like Naval Ravikant, who was the previous CEO or founder of Angels List, he talks about this a lot in a lot of his talk tracks, is that digital media is in such a good position because there's no cost of reproduction. It's like once you have the asset out there, boom, it can go viral. And so I think that's really the play for podcasting, and the value can bring to an advertiser, is that it's not like a print product, right? Somebody advertises in print, and that's going to be gone in the shelf in the recycle bin, trash can, the month after the next issue comes out, whatever that cadence may be. But with a podcast, someone could go to your podcast database and scroll through to months ago, years ago, and listen to a episode that's still evergreen. And whatever advertisers positioned in that episode still gets some value out of that. It's this long-term, lifelong value for advertising dollars versus a print ad that may be gone in weeks or months.
Mm-hmm. Very good point about it being evergreen. I think I do that a lot with podcasts. Someone shares one with me, I like it, I then look through the list of podcasts and say, this one seems interesting. I'm going to click into this one and listen to it as well, right? More on, road trips or, for travel, right? That's a big podcast time for me, at least.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can knock out a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the lift here, right, is the time that it takes to get the initial podcast complete, right? Recording, getting it edited, stuff like that. But then you have that content. So you could take that interview, theoretically, you could curate that. You could snip it up. You can post it on your social channels, get people excited about something that the interviewer talked about, but maybe, only talked about for a minute or two, right? And LinkedIn picks up on that and says, oh, here's an interesting video. Whereas, they're not going to listen to a 20-minute long form or, mid-form podcast, but that little bit could be enough to get somebody hooked to check a look at your brand or to open or accept a connect request from a salesperson or something like that. So lots of uses for it.
Yeah, a huge point is the social component and snipping up smaller assets of the longer podcast episode and driving some engagement that way. It's a huge point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. All right. Well, so we know why, now we know how. Do you have any kind of closing remarks in terms of podcasts? I know I'm a huge proponent for it, but say we've got some folks here that are still maybe a little reluctant to try it.
Yeah. If you're a publisher and you have any substantial size audience, even in as low as tens of thousands, I think it's worth doing, because generally speaking, if you or I to go start individual podcasts and to get that level of engagement, that's where we can start growing some money. But again, I think publishers are in such a good position, because if they don't have a podcast, they have the predetermined audience they can monetize and kind of pull that monetization lever and say, hey, here's another digital product that we can bring to our advertisers and add value to them, and also simultaneously add value to your audience and giving them another way to digest the content. And so, if you're not doing it, I would definitely encourage you to do it, simply because of it being, one, another revenue stream, and then two, the great, tremendous ripple effect that has on your content and publishing editorial calendars, what have you.
So you don't need to be Joe Rogan, host of Fear Factor, in order to make money doing a podcast. I think that's my takeaway from this. Yeah.
Yes.
Although I would have a tough time. A publisher is going to have a lot easier time doing it. They're in the right position for it. So.
For sure. Yeah. They have the access to the industry. A lot of people in B2B especially have been around for years and years and are the rock stars of their industry. So it's like they could gather a list of 100 guests to begin with, right off the bat, probably in a matter of days or weeks. And then, again, same thing with advertisers. If the relationship's been there long enough, I'm sure most advertisers, knowing the value of podcasts and that it is now $1 billion industry, would jump at the chance to partner with you.
Good stuff. Eric, thank you. Where can people find more information about you, your business, what you've been up to?
Sure. Yeah, you can go to my website. It's vessel-media.com. And then people can also email me. It's on the website, but it's just eric@vessel-media.com.
Good stuff. I'll put that in the email for folks so they can get in touch with you as well. But thanks, Eric. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure our listeners will too.
Nick, thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate the chance.
That wraps up today's episode. We hope to have brought you some valuable key takeaways. Most importantly, whatever you learned, take action on it. Apply it to your life. Apply it to your career. Motivation and inspiration only come as a result of taking that first step. So if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever platform you found the show. You can also follow us on all the major social media platforms or contact us directly at GenWhyLeaders@gmail.com. That's GenWhy leaders@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Eric Hughey, and thanks for listening to the GenWhy Leaders Podcast.